Imagine descending into the earth. The air becomes colder and still. The ceiling drips in slow, rhythmic taps as condensed moisture falls from ancient pores in the rock. The deeper you travel, the further back in time you move. Every meter carved away by the miners is a sentence peeled from the earliest pages of Earth's history. The strata press inward. They are silent witnesses. They carry memories in minerals instead of words. In a mine near the town of Ottosdal in South Africa, workers carve through a pale, soft stone called pyrophyllite. It is so ancient that it began forming long before plants or animals took hold of the continents. It came from volcanic ash that settled when the Earth was still young. The miners never expected their routine labor to uncover a mystery that would challenge common understanding and ignite global rumors. While cutting through the stone, they began finding objects. At first, the workers thought they were random bits of debris. But as more emerged, they noticed something strange. These objects were not jagged fragments of rock. They were round, not roughly round, but smoothly round, shaped as if someone had carefully formed them. They were about the size that could rest comfortably in a palm. Their color was dark, resembling aged metal. Some carried delicate grooves that ran along their middle, as if someone had pressed a guiding tool against the surface and slowly rotated it into place. In the dim light of a mining lamp, those grooves looked purposeful, intentional, artificial. The miners had unearthed what would later be called the Klerksdorp spheres. And though no one knew it yet, these spheres would become the center of decades of controversy. They would be photographed, displayed in museums, and discussed in books and television specials. People claimed they were impossible. They were called proof that history is wrong. The most sensational voices suggested that the spheres were made 200,000 years ago by advanced humans who vanished from Earth without leaving a trace. Others insisted they were not just older than humans, but older than life itself. They pointed out that the rock where the spheres were found had been dated to nearly 3 billion years in age. 3 billion years. If that rock truly sealed the spheres within itself at the time of its formation, then the objects would have existed at a time when Earth's atmosphere had almost no oxygen. A time when the planet was a world of shallow seas and simple microbial life. Not tools, not civilizations, just cells not yet dreaming of complexity. You can imagine how these claims caught fire. Newspapers began printing dramatic headlines about metallic objects mysteriously locked inside the oldest stones on Earth. The more sensational the reporting, the faster the story spread. People began writing letters to scientists demanding explanations. Some insisted that archaeology was hiding evidence of an earlier civilization. Others proposed that the spheres were proof of visitors from beyond our world. They suggested that extraterrestrial explorers had left behind artifacts as part of an unknown mission. It was not long before television producers realized that the idea of an impossible object buried in ancient rock could pull audiences into a state of collective wonder. And yet, the miners who found the spheres never tried to build a myth. The mystery began with nothing more than a puzzled worker picking up a strange round object and wondering how something so smooth could be trapped inside stone that resisted even industrial equipment. The miners did not write academic papers. They did not chase fame. They simply found something that defied their expectations. Others turned it into a sensation. The concept of an out-of-place artifact captured the imagination. The term refers to any object discovered in a location or time period where it should not logically exist. A modern piece of technology found deep within a layer of ancient sediment. A shaped metal tool discovered embedded in rock older than humanity. A carving that appears to show knowledge far beyond the abilities of the culture that supposedly made it. Such discoveries seem to whisper that history is not what we have been told, that civilizations may have risen and vanished, leaving only fragmentary traces, that human origins might stretch further back than we dare believe. Scientists are cautious when confronted with such claims. Extraordinary conclusions require extraordinary evidence. A single object without clear context cannot rewrite the timeline of human development. Yet over the years, the spheres continued to appear, each new one discovered in the same type of stone, each the same size and form, each smooth and surprisingly precise. To a person without geological training, the spheres look uncannily manufactured. They seem deliberate. They provoke questions as soon as they are seen. How could rock shape itself into something so perfect? Why are some of the spheres marked with fine, straight grooves? Why do they resemble crafted items rather than natural nodules? The story grew not because people wanted to understand geology, but because humans are drawn to mystery. We constantly search for meaning. When evidence does not fit our expectations, we invent an explanation that fills the gap. In this case, the gap was enormous. The spheres appeared to be millions or even billions of years older than humanity, and the human mind struggles to comprehend numbers that large. When confronted with timescales that stretch beyond imagination, our thoughts leap toward narratives. A secret lost age, a forgotten master culture, a visit from intelligent beings long before our species existed. Standing in the mine where they were found, holding one of the spheres, the experience is both simple and profound. It is just a small object, smooth and silent. But your thoughts run deeper. You begin to sense how easily human imagination can transform uncertainty into myth. The real mystery at this moment in the story is not the sphere itself, it is us. The sphere is only a mirror. It reflects the way we respond to the unknown. The sphere sits in your hand, cool, heavy, perfectly shaped. It feels like an object that belongs to intention, not accident. Your fingertips find the subtle groove that encircles it, like the equator of a tiny planet. In that moment, standing in the depths of ancient rock, a strange tension forms between what your senses suggest and what science demands. Sight and touch say crafted. Reason says impossible. Because if the rock encasing the sphere truly solidified almost 3 billion years ago, then no human hand could have placed it there. Human beings did not exist. Mammals did not exist. Even the ancestors of plants had not yet begun their monumental conquest of land. The world was a quiet ocean planet, where early microbial life floated in shallow seas, unaware that one day creatures would evolve who would hold polished spheres and wonder about their origin. This is where the mind begins to wander into forbidden possibilities. If humans could not have made it, then who did? If civilization did not exist, then what intelligence shaped something so deceptively perfect? The human brain has evolved to detect patterns. It recognizes symmetry. The grooves around the sphere resemble the seams of a manufactured object. Our instinct is to assign purpose. The imagination begins to weave. It asks questions that feel thrilling and dangerous at the same time. Could the history of human technology be wrong by not just centuries but millions of years? Could there have been a cycle of civilizations on Earth that rose and fell, leaving only fragments behind? The sphere invites these questions, but that does not mean it answers them. As the spheres gained attention, people began to visit the small museum in Klerksdorp, where examples were displayed behind glass. They leaned in close, searching for tool marks or scratches that might reveal a craftsman. They took photographs. They shared stories. A local curator once held one of the spheres up to the light and casually mentioned that the object seemed too perfect to be natural. That single comment, spoken without intention, became a spark. It was repeated, exaggerated, reshaped. Soon the phrase "perfect sphere" began appearing in articles that travelled far beyond the borders of the town. Researchers received letters from strangers insisting that the spheres must be evidence of something unexplained. Some demanded answers. Others offered their own. Meanwhile, geologists familiar with the region had not yet examined the spheres in detail. They knew the pyrophyllite rock was extremely ancient. They knew it had formed from volcanic ash that had settled at the bottom of early oceans. Over unimaginable spans of time, that ash was compressed, heated, and slowly transformed. But they had no reason at first to assume that the spheres required anything beyond normal geological processes. To them, the story was not an archaeological shock. It was a misunderstanding, a case of unfamiliar geology colliding with familiar storytelling. But outside the scientific community, the narrative grew more elaborate. People began to claim that the spheres were not just smooth, they were precisely balanced, perfect to a level that only advanced machining could accomplish. A story circulated that a researcher at a space technology lab tested a sphere and determined that it was engineered. However, when others followed up to locate the original lab report, it could not be traced. The citations simply did not exist. The claim lived on because it was exciting, not because it was true. The mystery deepened as newspapers and magazines leaned into the most dramatic angle. They rarely mentioned that the spheres were found loose inside the stone, not fixed in place as if grown within it. They did not explain that mining machinery can shift material during excavation. They omitted the possibility that the spheres might have formed naturally over time inside cavities in the rock. Instead, they presented a story in which miners struck solid pyrophyllite and extracted a perfect metal object sealed within it since the beginning of geological time. There is a powerful difference between what is true and what seems true when stripped of context. Humans are not neutral interpreters of reality. When information arrives without explanation, the imagination fills the gap. In this case, the gap stretched across billions of years. The unknown became fertile ground. People began to create narratives until the mystery grew larger than the actual objects. The spheres became symbols. To some, they symbolized proof that modern science was concealing the truth. To others, they symbolized evidence of beings from beyond Earth who left traces on our world long before our species appeared. They were powerful because they raised questions and offered no immediate answers. When something appears impossible, the mind often reaches for the extraordinary. This is not a flaw, it is part of what makes humans creative. We look at the unknown and we imagine what could be, but imagination without grounding can drift into illusion. In quiet moments, away from sensational headlines and from eager voices hunting evidence of an impossible past, the spheres are simply intriguing objects. They resemble the iron nodules found in other ancient rock formations around the world. Yet these have a quality that distinguishes them: the grooves, the smoothness, the symmetry. They seem to contain a whisper that says, "Remember me. Look closer. Do not let me be dismissed without thought." Imagine holding one sphere in your hand. You tilt it. The dim light reflects off its curved surface. The groove catches a shadow and suddenly appears sharper, more deliberate. Your mind begins to form an image of a craftsman rotating a small object, guiding a tool across its surface. You see skill, you see thought. Then remember the age of the rock, 3 billion years. At that time, Earth's surface was unstable and toxic. Meteorites still fell more frequently. The sky held a different color. The ocean was alien to us. The air lacked oxygen. No hands existed to shape anything. There were only microbes drifting in watery darkness. So how do we reconcile an object that looks designed with a time when design had not yet been invented? Curiosity urges us to reach for the extraordinary. But science insists we look closer, not to dismiss wonder, but to refine it. The real story is not that ancient humans accomplished impossible feats. The real story is that nature itself can be a designer, slow and patient, guided by forces we do not always recognize. Nature works without intention, yet sometimes produces forms that appear intentional, forms that blur the line between what is made and what is born. The discovery of the Klerksdorp spheres did not reveal forgotten civilizations. Instead, it revealed how easily humans can fall into the belief that every mystery has a human or intelligent cause. The spheres challenge us to accept that our planet is capable of creating shapes as precise as those made by tools, that time can sculpt with greater patience than any artisan, that the mind sees intention even where none exists. You stand there in the dim tunnel of the mine, sphere in hand, and without realizing it, you start to project stories onto it. Your brain searches its internal library for anything that resembles what you're seeing. A ball bearing, a piece of industrial machinery, a part of a tool. The smoothness feels deliberate, the groove looks like design, the weight implies density, strength, purpose. In that absence of immediate explanation, the mind chooses the explanation that feels familiar. Someone made this. But the further you explore the mystery, the clearer it becomes that imagination is steering the explanation more than evidence. Scientists eventually traveled to the mine after stories about the spheres began spreading. They collected samples of the stone and the spheres. They stored them in climate-controlled cabinets. They examined them under microscopes. They looked at the mineral composition, Not with wonder, but with discipline. With slow, careful steps, they began to trace the origin of the objects back through geological time. They discovered that the spheres were not metal, even though they appeared metallic. Many were composed of a mineral called hematite. Others were composed of goethite. Both are forms of iron oxide, minerals that form naturally under conditions involving water, heat, and slow chemical change. The grooves were not cuts, they were layers, bands, concentric growth lines created as minerals were deposited in stages. To someone who studies the Earth, these findings were expected, but to someone seeing only the surface without the underlying knowledge, the spheres seemed inexplicable, and that contrast between what seems and what is fuels the entire phenomenon of out-of-place artifacts. If you do not know the language of geology, the Earth itself can appear to be hiding secrets intentionally. When an object triggers the sense of manufactured form, we forget that nature also produces form. Consider snowflakes. Each one displays symmetry so precise that artisans struggle to recreate it. Yet snowflakes do not require intention, only temperature and time. Consider volcanic basalt columns that rise like enormous hexagonal pillars from the earth. They appear carved, engineered, a structure made by mathematics. Yet they form when lava cools slowly and contracts. Nature shapes geometry without trying. Still, one question remains. If the spheres are natural, why do they appear so perfect? Why do they seem to reflect design instead of randomness? The answer lies in the powerful simplicity of time. Time allows chaos to resolve into order. When a mineral forms slowly in a stable environment, forces equalize. Stress is distributed. Over long durations, shapes smooth themselves. Corners erode, edges disappear. What remains is not disorder, but balance. A sphere is not the shape of intention, it is the shape of equilibrium. The miners who first discovered the spheres did not know this. They saw what their instincts told them to see. They found novelty where scientists later found familiarity. When the spheres left the mine and entered the world of public imagination, they shed context as easily as dust falls from clothing. At that moment, they ceased to be geological specimens and became symbols of the unknown. People clung to the mystery because mysteries comfort us in a strange way. They remind us that the world is larger than we can comprehend. The unknown is exciting. The unexplained is empowering. If something cannot be explained, then anything might be possible. But mystery without evidence becomes myth. And myth spreads faster than truth, because myth does not require proof. It only requires belief. The Klerksdorp spheres became a perfect storm of misunderstanding, a mysterious shape, an unimaginable timescale, a missing explanation, a compelling story. Those ingredients form a narrative that resists correction, even when evidence appears, even when scientists speak. Once a mystery begins circulating as legend, people cling to it. Because in that moment, the story is no longer about the object. It is about the desire for the extraordinary. Imagine the sphere again. Imagine that it could speak. What would it say? It might say that humans are uncomfortable with the idea that nature can produce perfection without purpose, that humans assume intention where none exists, that we are drawn to design because we see ourselves as designers. But the sphere, if it could speak, would also tell the miners something else. It would say that the story they sparked would stretch across decades and continents, that people would continue to argue about its origin long after it was removed from the mine. It would say that the true tale is not about how it formed, but about how humans think. In truth, this object is neither artificial nor impossible. It is a geological nodule formed through slow deposition, a shape sculpted by time and pressure, a natural result of chemical processes acting over unimaginable spans of time. But for many, that reality seems less interesting than the fantasy that perhaps humans had a forgotten beginning, that perhaps intelligence walked the earth and vanished without leaving any clear trace, the fantasy that we are not alone in time. Yet there is something deeply beautiful about the real explanation. It does not diminish wonder, it deepens it. It shows that the earth itself is capable of sculpting complexity. That nature can achieve forms we normally attribute only to intelligence. It reveals that our planet is not a passive stage, it is an active artist, a slow, patient sculptor that shapes matter into forms that appear deliberate. If you trace the sphere back through time, past the miners, past the rock, past the volcanic ash, you reach a world that barely resembles the Earth we know, a world still cooling, a world where continents had not yet fully formed. Under shallow oceans, minerals precipitated and began a quiet dance of chemical attraction. Over millions of years, molecules bonded, layers built upon layers. Stress shaped the nodule, pressure polished it, time smoothed it, until eventually a sphere existed, waiting inside stone, waiting for hands that would not exist for almost 3 billion years, waiting for curiosity, waiting for a question. Perhaps that is the deeper message of the sphere. Not that something advanced existed long ago, but that patience creates complexity, that simplicity can lead to beauty, and that seeking truth requires looking beyond the story, that feels exciting toward the evidence that feels stable. The miners thought they had found something impossible. What they truly found was something far more profound. They found a reminder that reality is not limited by the boundaries of human imagination. The world can appear artificial without being designed. Perfection does not require intention. Nature is not random. Nature is patient. If we can accept that, then every mystery becomes an opportunity to learn instead of a reason to leap into fantasy. The spheres do not ask us to believe in forgotten worlds. They ask us to understand the one we already live in. And that may be the most extraordinary truth of all. The museum in the town of Klerksdorp is small. It sits quietly beneath the bright South African sun, a modest building that holds within it a story that has echoed far beyond its walls. Inside a glass display case, illuminated by soft yellow light, rest several of the spheres that once lay hidden inside ancient rock. They sit upon a simple velvet cloth, dark against the fabric, like fragments of a world that should never have intersected with our own timeline. Visitors lean close to the glass, drawn not only by the smoothness of the spheres, but by the subtle groove that runs around their middle. The groove is shallow yet precise, and in the soft light it seems to catch every wandering gaze. The longer a person studies the spheres, the more deliberate they appear. The museum does not sensationalize them. There are no dramatic posters or bold claims. The label beside the case lists only the basics. Hematite nodule found in pyrophyllite. Origin Ottosdal region, South Africa. Precambrian deposit. The simplicity of the label is almost frustrating. It does not attempt to explain the mystery. It merely states the facts with clinical calm. To the viewer, it feels like the museum is withholding something. Here are objects that look perfectly formed, yet the sign offers no interpretation, no theory, no hint of astonishment. Only 3 short lines that place the burden of wonder back on the observer. The spheres themselves do not radiate mystery, they simply exist. Yet the mind of the observer fills the silence with questions. If these spheres are truly natural, why do they look engineered? If they were formed slowly over millions of years, why do they appear so flawless? The grooves in particular contradict expectation. They are not random scratches or accidental imperfections. They form an unmistakable band that loops around the sphere as though it were spun on a forgotten lathe. For many visitors, seeing the spheres for the first time triggers an instant collision between logic and intuition. Logic whispers that minerals can form strange shapes. Intuition insists that something shaped these spheres on purpose. When people hear that the rock surrounding the spheres formed nearly 3 billion years ago, their imagination leaps to extraordinary conclusions. 3 billion years is not just a long time. It is a time so vast that it dwarfs our ability to visualize it. Imagine every human story ever recorded. Every empire, every religion, every invention. Place them side by side, then imagine them shrinking to a single grain of sand. Now imagine that grain sitting on the edge of a desert, that stretches beyond the horizon. That is our history, compared to the age of the rock that once encased the spheres. The idea that something shaped and symmetrical could exist within rock that old feels like fiction. Yet here they are, resting behind glass. When early miners first discovered these spheres, they did not see them as geological puzzles. They saw them as anomalies inside rock so ancient it resisted all attempts to assign meaning to it. Some spheres were found loose, as if they had been resting in natural cavities within the stone. Others were partially embedded. Miners chipped them free and pocketed them without thinking much about them. They were curiosities, small treasures to place on a desk, or carry as a token of good luck. For decades, the spheres circulated among miners and their families without attracting scientific attention. Their significance was born not from their discovery, but from what happened later when word reached people outside the mines. A newspaper article eventually gave the spheres their first taste of public attention. The article described them as perfectly formed metal spheres. That description was misleading. Hematite can appear metallic, especially when polished or when light catches it at certain angles. But it is not metal in the way that steel or iron tools are metal. Yet the phrase metallic sphere was enough to ignite imaginations. The article offered a bold statement. According to the claim, these spheres were so precisely balanced that they exceeded the tolerances of modern machine technology. It was a dramatic sentence, irresistible to anyone who already believed that history holds hidden secrets. There was only one problem. No record existed of any engineer or laboratory test confirming such precision. But once a claim has been made, especially one that appeals to mystery, it takes on a life of its own. The story spread through conversations in mining towns, then through hobbyist newsletters. Eventually, the narrative reached magazines that thrived on extraordinary claims. They reproduced the same statement again and again. No one traced the quote to its source because the thrill of possibility outweighed the need for proof. The spheres had now escaped the mine and entered legend. Some people claimed that the grooves were machined, that the spheres must have been designed using tools belonging to an unknown ancient culture. Others insisted that the spheres could not have been made by humans at all, because humans did not exist when the rock was formed. They linked the spheres to theories about advanced civilizations lost to time, cultures that supposedly rose to greatness long before recorded history, and then fell without leaving behind anything except impossible objects. The grooves became the focal point of the debate. Grooves invite interpretation because they look like the product of rotation. People imagine a tool spinning while pressing against the surface. They imagine machinery. They imagine intention. Scientists later explained that the grooves are natural layering, bands that form as iron oxide precipitates and deposits in cycles. But for someone seeing the sphere without context, that explanation feels unsatisfying. We are trained to think of grooves as indicators of tool work. When we see symmetry, our brains leap to the conclusion of design. We look at a pebble on the beach and accept randomness. But when we see smoothness, balance, and a line that circles neatly around an object, we assume intention. Preparation for understanding begins not with evidence but with expectation. When a person steps into the museum and sees the spheres, they are already carrying an expectation shaped by stories, videos, and rumors. The expectation says that these spheres are not geological, relics but clues left behind by unknown intelligence. When expectation meets ambiguity, the imagination chooses the interpretation that excites rather than the explanation that explains. But the spheres do not care what we believe. They sit in the display case, unmoved by the stories told about them. They are silent, patient relics of slow geological processes. They owe nothing to our desire for mystery. They existed long before humans invented questions. A scientist examining one of the spheres does not see hidden intention. The scientist sees mineral layering where others see grooves. The scientist sees concentric growth where others see machining. Where a visitor sees perfection, a geologist sees natural symmetry produced by time and pressure. Nothing in these spheres challenges the vast timeline of Earth. They fit perfectly within it. The only thing they challenge is our assumptions. Pause here and reflect. The sphere in the museum is not a relic of forgotten culture. It is a reminder that the Earth itself can create complexity without design. When we remove expectation, we begin to see what is truly extraordinary. Nature did not stumble into these shapes. Nature shaped them slowly with consistency, with chemical processes that operated without intention, yet created something that appears intentional. And it only seems mysterious because our minds do not expect nature to be precise. A visitor stands in front of the glass case and makes a quiet comment under their breath. It looks like a machine part. Another visitor whispers that it resembles a bearing from a motor, or a component from a device that should not exist in the deep past. This reaction is almost universal. People assume that only intelligence produces symmetry. They assume that only design creates grooves. They assume that nature is chaotic and random. Yet this assumption reveals more about our psychology than about geology. We imagine that nature works in jagged lines and unpredictable fractures. But minerals do not obey the instincts of the human mind. They obey rules of chemistry and physical stress. A drop of water will always seek the path of least resistance. Minerals will always grow in the direction of lowest energy. When this happens slowly, each layer forms evenly around the last. Layer after layer builds until the shape becomes rounded. Over spans of time far greater than the rise and fall of civilizations, randomness disappears and balance emerges. The sphere is not the shape of intention, it is the shape of equilibrium. The grooves on some of the Klerksdorp spheres are not marks from tools, but the record of growth. In the way a tree forms rings as it ages, these spheres formed bands as minerals accumulated. Where most minerals build chaotic clusters, hematite and goethite can form outwardly in smooth shells. Each shell carries a slightly different composition. When the sphere is later exposed to weathering or erosion, certain layers dissolve more quickly than others, leaving shallow lines that appear deliberate. It is not design, it is differential hardness, a slow, natural sculpting of layers that were always there. Yet those explanations never seem as satisfying as the mystery. The museum continues to receive letters, some of them emotional, asking for proof that the spheres are natural. People ask whether scientists have tested them for machining residue. They ask if the spheres were scanned with advanced imaging. They ask if the grooves were measured to determine whether they are perfectly even. The underlying assumption is always the same. If humans can create perfect spheres, and these objects appear perfect, then someone much older and more advanced must have created them. The imagination leaps ahead and fills the silence with possibility. Scientists eventually tested the spheres using thin section analysis. A sphere was sliced and examined under a microscope. The interior revealed layers of mineral growth and crystalline structure consistent with nodules formed through natural precipitation. The grooves corresponded to layers visible inside the sphere. The results were clear. No evidence of machining, no sharp tool marks, no signs of artificial shaping, only minerals arranged according to chemistry and time. But the conclusion of scientists did not make the story disappear. In fact, in some circles it made the mystery grow. Some people argued that the scientists were dismissing the spheres too quickly. Others claimed that the laboratory methods could not rule out intelligent shaping. A few suggested that the spheres were being deliberately explained away to protect conventional timelines of history. It is easy to see how a simple misunderstanding can evolve into a narrative of secrecy. There is a point where fascination shifts into conviction, where the desire for mystery becomes more important than the evidence. When people want a mystery to exist, they do not look for answers. They look for justification. A person can stand in front of the same sphere and come away with two entirely different truths. The scientist sees mineral nodules. The storyteller sees forbidden history. The sphere has not changed. Only the narrative surrounding it has. Imagine a hypothetical person from a distant future walking into a museum and finding a metal bearing from a modern machine. If they had no knowledge of our technology, they might assume it had been created by some form of unknown intelligence. They would project meaning onto the object based on their own assumptions. This is what we do when we encounter objects that appear beyond the timeline we know. We treat the unknown as evidence of the extraordinary. As more spheres were collected from the mines, workers began to treat them casually. Some kept them in their pockets as good luck charms. They rolled them across tables, they gave them as novelty gifts. The miners did not view the spheres as evidence of ancient intelligence. To them, they were curiosities, smooth stones with unusual grooves. The miners had seen enough strange formations underground to understand that nature can surprise even those who work closest to it. In the museum, the label beside the spheres does not try to compete with the dramatic stories that swirl around them. It does not say ancient civilization. It does not say alien artifact. It simply names the mineral and the rock. An ordinary explanation written in ordinary language. The irony is that the ordinary explanation is far more astonishing than the fantasy. The rock that once held these spheres was already ancient before multicellular organisms appeared, before trilobites, before the first plants emerged from the ocean. While Earth was still shaping itself, these nodules were forming quietly in the darkness. When you consider the timeline, the spheres are not remnants of a forgotten civilization. They are reminders that Earth has been creative far longer than humans have existed. The patience required for such a sphere to form is beyond human comprehension. We measure time in years. Nature measures in the rise and fall of mountain ranges. And yet, these objects invite wonder. Even after understanding their geological formation, the fascination does not disappear. If anything, the true explanation is even more powerful. It shows that nature is capable of symmetry that rivals crafted design. It shows that minerals can organize themselves into forms that seem intentional. It shows that perfection does not require purpose. People travel to Klerksdorp to see the spheres because they want to feel that sense of wonder. They want to stand before something ancient and be reminded that not all mysteries are solved. Some visitors leave disappointed because the scientific explanation does not align with the thrill they were seeking. Others leave with a deeper respect for the planet, realizing that the natural world is far more creative than they once imagined. The Klerksdorp spheres are not valuable because they are artificial. They are valuable because they reveal how easily we forget the artistry of nature. We live in a world surrounded by human design. Machines shape metal. Factories create symmetry. Tools cut grooves with precision. In such a world, we learn to associate perfection with intention. When nature produces perfection, our minds hesitate. We are forced to rethink our assumptions. The spheres are not evidence of lost technology. They are evidence of lost perspective. They invite us to remember that the Earth itself is capable of creating forms that challenge our imagination without needing our imagination to explain them. They show that the line between natural and artificial is not as clear as we believe. They remind us that mystery is not a threat to knowledge. It is a doorway to curiosity. When scientists finally published formal descriptions of the spheres, their tone was calm and careful. They explained the mineral composition. They described the geological environment of the Precambrian pyrophyllite. They showed diagrams of the internal layers and explained that the grooves matched natural internal banding. The language was neutral. In that language, there were no dramatic revelations, no ancient civilizations, no forgotten technologies, just slow natural processes operating over spans of time that stretch beyond imagination. But outside scientific journals, the story took on a different life. A popular magazine in the 1970s ran an article suggesting that the spheres were beyond the capability of modern machining. That sentence caused a ripple that would not fade for decades. Other magazines repeated it, then television segments repeated it, then websites repeated those segments. People quoted the claim as if it came from an authoritative source. They passed it from one person to another until it felt like fact. The original claim never provided a laboratory name, never gave a test result, never cited a scientist. But the absence of evidence did not slow the story. It accelerated it. When something is unexplained, it becomes easier for the imagination to expand the boundaries. The fewer facts available, the more space there is to invent. Visitors began to write letters to the museum, asking if the spheres were proof of an advanced culture that predates humanity. Some letters claimed that the grooves matched what would appear if the spheres were spun in a machine. Others insisted that the spheres must be artificial because nature does not create such perfection. Museum staff responded politely, explaining that the spheres were natural mineral formations. But for many, the explanation felt unsatisfying. They wanted the world to hold more mystery than geology offered. Later, the University of Johannesburg conducted detailed analysis. A professor of petrology named Bruce Cairncross studied the spheres under magnification. He found that each sphere contained internal structures consistent with slow mineral precipitation. The grooves on the surface corresponded to the internal layering. His conclusion was clear. There was nothing mysterious or artificial about them. They were natural concretions formed inside pyrophyllite during the slow alteration of volcanic ash. This should have ended the debate, but myths have momentum. Once a myth gains speed, truth becomes an obstacle rather than a destination. People began to divide into two camps: those who accepted the scientific explanation and those who believed that the spheres collected from the mines were something beyond nature. It did not matter that laboratory tests had shown the spheres to be iron oxide nodules. It did not matter that the grooves matched internal layering. It did not matter that miners often found them loose, not embedded. The myth was already stronger than the evidence. We often imagine that humans seek truth, but in many cases, humans seek meaning. Truth is limited. Meaning is infinite. When someone stands before the spheres in the museum, they are not looking at mineral samples. They are staring at a mirror that reflects their own beliefs about the unknown. A scientist sees geological history. A believer sees hidden history. A storyteller sees possibility. A skeptic sees misunderstanding. The object is neutral. The interpretation is personal. Imagine you are the visitor. You stand before the glass. You think about the timeline. You think about the idea that a sphere was sealed in rock older than any animal. You picture ancient Earth. The surface was barren. The oceans were dark with iron. Volcanoes erupted constantly. Lightning cracked across a sky thick with carbon dioxide. In those oceans, the first single-celled organisms drifted aimlessly. They had no bodies, no eyes, no minds. They simply existed because chemistry allowed them to exist. At the same time, inside that volcanic ash, small concentrations of iron oxide were beginning to clump together. Over millions of years, those clumps rounded out. Over millions more, layers built upon layers. Each layer formed under slightly different conditions, creating subtle bands. As stress and pressure continued to shape the nodule, the outer layers hardened differently than the inner ones. In some spheres, this difference produced the sharp groove that visitors now argue about. The spheres are old, older than anything built by humans, older than anything imagined by humans, but they are not artificial, and their true origin is even more remarkable than the myths, because they demonstrate that the natural world is capable of shaping matter into forms that appear designed. They show that time is a sculptor, and that patience is its chisel. If the spheres had been carved by ancient hands, that would be evidence of intelligence. But the fact that they were shaped by natural forces over spans of time that exceed our ability to comprehend is evidence of something deeper. Evidence that the Earth can produce complexity without intention. Evidence that nature is not random but lawful. Evidence that beauty can form without a maker. The story of the Klerksdorp spheres is not a tale of lost civilizations. It is a lesson in how humans respond to the unknown. When we encounter something that does not fit our expectations, we do not begin with curiosity. We begin with assumption. We assume intelligence where there is symmetry. We assume design where there is precision. We assume purpose where there is pattern. But sometimes the most profound answer is also the simplest. The spheres are natural. They formed slowly inside ancient stone. They are the result of mineral growth, not machines. People search for magic in the past because they forget that magic exists in the present. They look for extraordinary explanations because they overlook the extraordinary reality that surrounds them. The Earth has spent billions of years creating forms beyond anything we can imagine. The spheres are one of countless examples. If you look closely, you begin to see that the mystery does not vanish when the scientific explanation is revealed. It evolves into something richer. Instead of asking who made the spheres, you begin asking how minerals organize into such perfect shapes. Instead of imagining machines in ancient times, You begin imagining the forces of chemistry converging in perfect balance. Instead of picturing lost cultures shaping stone, you picture time itself shaping matter. Truth does not destroy wonder. Truth refines wonder. The Klerksdorp spheres remain in their glass cases, silent and unchanged. They do not argue. They do not defend themselves against theories. They simply wait for the next visitor to look at them and choose what to believe. And perhaps that is the deepest mystery they offer. In the end, the real question is not whether the spheres are artificial. The real question is why humans feel the need for them to be. The story did not explode in a laboratory or a university office. It ignited in a small town where miners shared tales over quiet evenings, letting curiosity slip into rumour. Then the rumour reached a local newspaper. At first, the description was simple: strange round stones found inside ancient rock, perfectly formed, metallic in appearance. But one sentence changed everything. The article mentioned that the rock where the spheres were discovered was nearly 3 billion years old. That number alone was enough to send imaginations racing. 3 billion. The words themselves feel like a myth. When spoken aloud, they stretch beyond comprehension. They speak of a time when Earth was young and unrecognizable. From that starting point, the narrative began to evolve. A hobby science magazine printed a small story about the spheres. The journalist was not a geologist. They did not speak to university researchers. Instead, they relied on anecdotes. Somewhere along the chain of retelling, that anecdote transformed into a claim that one of the spheres had been tested at a government laboratory and found to be balanced beyond the limits of modern machinery. The magazine printed that claim without asking for a source. There was no mention of a test result, no name of a scientist, no citation of a study. The statement simply appeared, bold and dramatic, and people believed it because it was thrilling. That is how the first spark became a wildfire. Readers wrote letters. More magazines repeated the phrase almost verbatim. It did not matter that no scientist had confirmed the story. It did not matter that no laboratory records existed. All that mattered was that the claim fed a kind of hunger. People wanted to believe that the world still held secrets that defied experts. They wanted to believe that ancient history was far older and more complex than textbooks suggested. The sphere became proof of that belief. Then television producers took notice. A show that specialized in mysteries came to South Africa to film the spheres. The producers brought dramatic lighting and close-up camera shots. They treated the spheres as if they were forbidden relics. They never mentioned thin section analysis or mineral composition. Instead, they repeated the magazine claim that the spheres were engineered with accuracy too precise for modern machinists. The camera zoomed in on the groove. Music swelled. The narration implied that a civilization of unknown origin must have shaped the spheres. Millions of viewers watched. They did not see a natural mineral object. They saw evidence. The internet era magnified the story even further. People began posting photographs of the spheres on forums dedicated to alternative archaeology. The claims grew bolder with every retelling. The spheres became proof that humans once possessed advanced technology. Some posts claimed that the spheres had properties that defied gravity. Others suggested that they emitted energy. None of these claims were supported by evidence, but the pattern had already taken root. Online audiences did not search for confirmation. They searched for confirmation of what they already hoped was true. The age of the rock was misunderstood and misrepresented. Many people read that the rock was nearly 3 billion years old and assumed that the spheres inside must be the same age. They imagined a machine-made sphere resting inside stone as the continents formed. But geology does not work like that. Minerals can move within softer rock. Erosion can carry nodules into older layers. Cavities can open and refill. The spheres were found loose inside the rock. They were not sealed inside as if placed there at the moment the rock formed. Yet the internet stripped away nuance. The story became simplified into a slogan repeated across countless pages. Perfect metal spheres found in 3 billion-year-old rock. Every part of that sentence is misleading. The spheres are not metal, they are minerals. The grooves are not tool marks, they are natural layering. and the age of the rock does not automatically determine the age of the sphere inside it. But simple stories spread faster than accurate ones. People do not share data, they share wonder. Once the idea of ancient technology attaches itself to an object, it becomes nearly impossible to separate the object from the myth. The Klerksdorp spheres became icons. People printed them on posters. They used them in documentaries about lost civilizations. They paired images of the spheres with dramatic music and grainy footage of ruins. Some presenters even hinted that the spheres might be part of an ancient global network of technology that was erased from human memory. No matter how many scientists explained the mineral composition, the myth endured because the myth was more exciting. The internet rewarded certainty, not accuracy. A person could type a sentence into a comment section and declare the spheres to be artifacts of an advanced society. And that sentence would be repeated endlessly by others who preferred the thrill of mystery over the slow patience of evidence. There is an emotional force behind wanting the spheres to be artificial. If they were made intentionally, then history becomes deeper and more dramatic. Suddenly, humans are not the first intelligent beings to shape the Earth. Suddenly, we are part of a much older story, a story that feels epic. The truth does not compete with that feeling easily. Truth requires patience. Mystery requires nothing. When a sensational claim spreads far enough, it becomes a kind of folklore. People refer to it as if it were common knowledge. They insist that scientists are afraid to acknowledge the truth. They accuse museums of hiding evidence. They turn curiosity into suspicion, and slowly, the real sphere is replaced by the imagined one. But myths reveal something powerful. They show what humans long for. Humans long for a world that is larger than the visible. Humans long for hidden chapters in history. Humans long for proof that we are not the first or the only intelligence to shape matter with purpose. The Klerksdorp spheres were never artifacts of forgotten technology. They were artifacts of human imagination. Yet, to dismiss the myth entirely would be to miss something important. The myth reveals a desire to explore, to question, to wonder. The problem is not curiosity. The problem is when curiosity stops before reaching evidence, when the thrill of the story becomes more valuable than the truth behind the story. If we follow the story deeper, if we slow our pace, if we ask the uncomfortable questions, we begin to see something more meaningful than legend. The spheres are not extraordinary because they are artificial. They are extraordinary because they show how quickly humans will build monuments out of misunderstanding. They show that mystery is not always hiding in the artifact. Sometimes the mystery is hiding in us. At this point, the sensational claims have reached global scale. Forums, videos, documentaries, all pointing to one object resting silently in a display case. The world believes it is proof of something impossible. Meanwhile, the geologists are waiting. They have the data, they have the samples, they have the explanation, and they know exactly what the spheres are. If you approve, I will continue with the next part of Chapter 3, where the story shifts from viral claims to the scientific investigation that challenges them. The turning point in the story did not come from believers or storytellers. It came from a group of geologists who had grown tired of hearing claims that ignored the physics of minerals and the patience of time. When scientists first encountered the viral claims, they were not angry. They were puzzled. They wondered how a natural mineral nodule had been transformed into evidence for ancient intelligence. They wondered how a simple shape had become a symbol. To them, the spheres were fascinating, but not because they were mysterious. They were fascinating because they represented one of the earliest stages of Earth's geological evolution. To hold a sphere formed during the earliest Precambrian era is to hold a fragment of Earth from an age that does not resemble anything alive today. Scientists began by examining the rock itself. Pyrophyllite is a soft metamorphic stone formed from volcanic ash. When water and heat act on ash for millions upon millions of years, the minerals rearrange. Spaces open, nodules form. Iron-rich minerals can precipitate into these openings. The environment needed to create hematite and goethite concretions is not mysterious. It is slow and stable. It requires time and pressure, not intelligence. The scientists sliced a sphere using a precise diamond blade. When examined under magnification, the interior revealed bands, concentric layers formed by repeated deposition of minerals. The grooves on the outside matched the variation of the internal layers. The outer shell had been weathered slightly more quickly than the surrounding material, creating the appearance of a carved line. It was not a cut, it was not a seam, it was a natural boundary between layers of different hardness. One of the researchers made a simple but powerful statement. There was nothing artificial about the spheres. The grooves did not come from tools. The symmetry did not come from deliberate shaping. The objects were nodules, similar to iron concretions found in other parts of the world. The only difference was that these formed in a rock that happened to be incredibly ancient. When scientists published these findings, something unexpected happened. Instead of putting an end to the myth, the explanation fueled a new type of speculation. Some people argued that the spheres must still be artificial because they looked engineered. Others argued that if scientists could not prove exactly how each sphere formed, then perhaps intelligent design remained a possibility. The burden of proof shifted from those making the extraordinary claims to those who were simply explaining the mineralogy. The myth had become a fortress. Evidence was treated as an attack, not as clarity. On internet forums, the argument changed shape. People began insisting that the grooves were too straight to be natural. They demanded to know why not every sphere had grooves. Scientists explained that not every concretion forms under identical conditions. Variation is expected. But those who believed in the mystery interpreted variation as more proof of intention. When a belief grows strong enough, it begins bending facts to fit its narrative. The story reached a dramatic moment when a television documentary presented a sensational comparison. A close-up shot of a sphere was shown beside a polished ball bearing from a machine. The narrator asked the viewer to notice how similar the objects looked. The suggestion was clear. If something resembles a machine part, perhaps it truly is a machine part. But resemblance is not evidence. A cloud can resemble an animal. A coastline can resemble a pattern. The mind is a factory for shapes and meaning. Scientists watched the documentary with disbelief. They had the thin section images. They had the chemical analysis. They had the geological explanation. Yet the audience wanted the mystery. They preferred the idea that a forgotten culture left an object inside stone, older than life itself. The documentary presented a conclusion without requiring proof. It replaced the slow march of evidence with a quick surge of imagination. One scientist made an observation that captured the heart of the issue. People want the spheres to be artificial because artificial objects confirm their belief that humans are part of a story more dramatic than the one written by geology. The idea that the spheres are natural seems too quiet, too patient, too slow. The myth suggests action, purpose, intention. Reality suggests patience, pressure, time. But reality does not demand belief. It simply waits. The viral spread of the mystery reveals how stories can overpower facts. People who had never seen the spheres in person spoke with absolute certainty about their origin. They used phrases like clearly manufactured and obviously machined. They made claims without having examined a single sample. They shared images without context. They quoted statements without verification. And they did so with confidence because the narrative made them feel part of something larger. Belief offers comfort. Facts offer clarity. Humans are often drawn to comfort first. Consider how easily the story changed when passed from one person to another. A miner originally said that the spheres looked strange. Someone repeated that they looked smooth. Someone else added that they looked artificial. Then a writer embellished the claim by saying they were perfectly balanced. Soon, the story became that scientists cannot explain them. When the claim reached the internet, the narrative evolved again. Now the spheres were ancient artifacts. Then they became evidence of a forgotten civilization. Finally, they became proof of extraterrestrial visitors. At no point were these claims supported with test results. At no point did someone produce a study. But the absence of verification became part of the myth. People began to believe that the truth was being hidden. that scientists were afraid to admit what the spheres represented. Conspiracy became the final appeal of those who could not defend their claims with facts. Whenever an idea depends on the existence of a conspiracy to survive, that idea is no longer about evidence. It becomes a belief system. The truth about the Klerksdorp spheres is not dramatic. It is not cinematic. It is not the plot of a documentary searching for forbidden technology. The truth is quiet and slow, but it is also astonishing in its own way. These spheres formed naturally inside ancient pyrophyllite through the slow accumulation of iron minerals. Their symmetry is the result of evenly distributed growth under stable conditions. Their grooves are the result of layered deposition and selective erosion. The spheres are not impossible. They are inevitable, given enough time. Yet people continue to argue because humans want the world to be filled with hidden meaning. We want our discoveries to change everything. We want our mysteries to prove that we are part of a larger story. The spheres remain in their museum case, silent witnesses to our struggle between what we want to believe and what we can demonstrate. There is something deeply revealing in this. When faced with the unknown, some chase wonder. Others chase truth. The most curious among us chase both. When the geologists finally entered the conversation, they did not arrive with excitement or dramatic promises. They arrived with clipboards, sample bags, and a kind of quiet patience that only comes from working with time on a planetary scale. They walked through the same mines where the spheres had once been collected, examining the walls of the tunnels, the soft layers of pale pyrophyllite, and the pockets where the spheres had rested. Unlike the storytellers, the geologists were not looking for signs of intelligent design. They were looking for the signature of processes that take millions of years to leave their mark. The miners watched them as they worked. Where miners looked at stone as a barrier to be removed, geologists saw a record of events written in minerals. Every shade of color, every tiny variation held meaning. The pyrophyllite itself began as volcanic ash that settled into ancient water during the early Precambrian era. Over unimaginable stretches of time, that ash was compressed and altered by heat and chemistry. The layers that miners carved through were older than continents as we know them, older than soil, older than bones. The spheres that sparked the controversy were not metal. They only appeared metallic because hematite reflects light in a way that tricks the eye. When the geologists collected samples and examined them under microscopes, the truth became clear. Each sphere was composed of minerals common in sedimentary and metamorphic environments. Some were hematite, some were goethite. Both are forms of iron oxide. They do not require tools to form. They require only time. The key to understanding the spheres lies in the environment of pyrophyllite. Because this rock begins as soft ash, it allows space for minerals to migrate through it. Water-carrying dissolved iron moves slowly through the rock, depositing iron oxide in pockets where conditions are stable. These pockets act like molds. If the pressure and chemical environment remain constant, the mineral grows outward evenly from a tiny center point. Growth in all directions leads to the most efficient shape possible, a sphere. The grooves on the spheres fascinated everyone who saw them, but to the geologists, the grooves were not mysterious. They were simply differences between layers of mineral composition. During the formation of the nodule, the environment shifts slightly. More iron might enter the solution. Less water might pass through. These changes alter the density of the new layer that forms. When erosion later removes the softer outer layers, the harder layers remain as thin bands. To a casual observer, those bands appear like grooves carved with intention. To someone trained in mineral growth, they appear exactly as expected. One geologist, kneeling beside a slab of exposed pyrophyllite, scraped at the surface with a small tool. He nodded to himself when he found a half-formed sphere embedded in the rock. The sphere was not sealed within solid stone. It sat in a pocket. The surrounding material had once been soft enough that the nodule could shift slightly as conditions changed. This explained why miners found so many spheres loose. They rolled out easily because the stone crumbled, away before them. Not because someone placed them there, because the rock that once held them had become softer over time. After collecting enough samples, the geologists returned to their laboratories and prepared thin slices of the spheres. They cut a cross-section and polished it so that light could pass through. Under magnification, the internal structure was unmistakable. Concentric layers formed like the rings inside a tree. The grooves on the outside corresponded perfectly to those internal layers. Nothing about the structure indicated heat treatment or machining. Instead, every layer followed the slow rhythm of repetition. Mineral deposition, pause, mineral deposition, pause, a slow dance of chemistry. One researcher tapped a pointer to the screen displaying the magnified view. He spoke with a voice that had the certainty of evidence. The sphere is natural. The layering is natural. There is nothing artificial here. For a moment, the room was silent. Not because the conclusion was shocking, because the conclusion was simple. Outside the laboratory, the story of ancient technology continued to grow. But inside the laboratory, something far more profound was unfolding. Scientists realized that the spheres were not anomalous. They were predictable. If the conditions of mineral formation were repeated, similar spheres could form again. They did not need intelligence, they needed stability. And stability is nature's version of patience. The scientists traced the mineral composition using instruments capable of identifying chemical signatures. They analyzed the oxygen within the iron oxides to determine the environmental conditions present when the minerals formed. The spheres told a clear story. They formed slowly within a closed environment where mineral-rich water seeped into pockets of ash that later became stone. The geologists uncovered the truth that the myths refused to acknowledge. The spheres were not ancient technology, they were ancient time. In their reports, the scientists avoided dramatic language. They did not accuse anyone of creating false stories, they simply presented data. But the data had power. It showed that the mystery was not a failure of science, it was a failure of understanding. The spheres were extraordinary, not because they were made by intelligence, but because they were shaped without it. The grooves were not a sign of precision, they were a sign of time. The symmetry was not a sign of machining, it was a sign of equilibrium. Most powerful of all, the scientists did not strip away wonder, they redirected it. When we imagine ancient technology, we imagine intention. When we imagine natural formation, we imagine randomness. But nature does not operate by randomness. It operates by laws. When minerals follow these laws long enough, they arrive at shapes that challenge our assumptions about what counts as design. The geologists did not find evidence of lost civilizations. They found evidence that nature can create perfection. And that realization opened a new question. If nature can produce perfect spheres, what else can it shape that we mistakenly interpret as deliberate? When you stand before one of the spheres, it is easy to forget that everything we call mysterious once had no explanation. But the truth is patient. The truth waits for those willing to look deeper. The geologists did not rush. They understood that when dealing with rocks formed in the earliest chapters of Earth's history, haste only invites error. They continued gathering samples not only from the mine that had become famous, but from nearby formations that shared the same geological origin. Their aim was simple. If the spheres were natural, then similar formations should exist elsewhere under comparable conditions. They did. In another section of the mine, one of the geologists found a smaller sphere partially enclosed in the pyrophyllite. The rock around it was soft enough to crumble with a gentle scrape. When he brushed the dust away, the sphere remained perfectly round on the exposed side, its hidden half still embedded like an egg in a nest. No machine had placed it there. The mineral layering was visible even without cutting it open. It looked like the shell of an onion, gradual, patient, evolving slowly. The spheres were not teleporting into the rock, they were growing inside it. The geologists began documenting the formation process. They discovered that the nodules began as microscopic concentrations of iron within the ash. As water moved through the sediment over millions of years, it carried dissolved minerals with it. When conditions were right, iron bonded with oxygen. This reaction produced hematite or goethite. The initial speck of mineral acted as a seed. As more iron oxide deposited, A shell formed around that seed. If the water continued to flow evenly from all sides, the shell expanded uniformly. This is the secret of the shape. A sphere requires no intention. It requires only balance. People often associate nature with randomness, but in geology, randomness is rare. Everything follows rules. Iron seeks certain bonding structures. Stress seeks equilibrium. When a system has enough time to reach balance, symmetry becomes inevitable. A sphere is not the product of chaos. It is the product of order. More scanning and chemical testing confirmed the initial results. The spheres contained no trace of alloys or refined metals, no carbon residues indicating tool shaping, no irregularities that would suggest heat treatment. Instead, the interior structure was consistent with concretion. The minerals aligned in a pattern that reflected slow precipitation from water, not the compression of a mold or the cutting of a tool. At one point during the analysis, a graduate student placed a sphere under a higher magnification lens. As the focus sharpened, the internal layers appeared like faint ripples frozen in time. The student leaned back and whispered that it looked exactly like the growth layers inside certain fossils. Another student shook their head and corrected them. A fossil records the past shape of life. This records the past shape of chemistry. Their professor smiled and said that in a way, both statements were correct. Life is chemistry slowed down and given purpose. These spheres were chemistry slowed down and given patience. More surprising results emerged when the scientists examined the groove structures. They took measurements from multiple spheres. Some grooves were shallow, some deeper, but all followed the same consistent pattern. Each groove formed where the mineral composition shifted slightly during growth. In places where the iron oxide was purer, the material was harder. In places where other elements mixed into the mineral, the material was softer. Over time, erosion removes the softer layers more easily, leaving behind the harder lines as continuous grooves around the surface. To a geologist, this was exactly what should happen. To a curious visitor, it looked like machining. The grooves were not cuts, they were boundaries. The spheres did not challenge geology, they demonstrated it. As the data accumulated, one conclusion became unavoidable. The spheres were products of natural forces operating over extraordinary stretches of time. They were not evidence of intelligence, they were evidence of deep time. Every layer recorded a moment when minerals precipitated into shape. Every groove revealed a pause in the flow of water, a shift in chemical balance, or a change in temperature. If someone wanted to read the history of the sphere, they could. The layers told the story of Earth long before humans existed. When the final reports were written, the scientists handed the results to the museum. The museum displayed the explanation beside the spheres. Visitors read the label. Some nodded and accepted the science. Others leaned closer to the glass and whispered that the explanation seemed too simple. This reveals something telling about the human mind. When confronted with a mystery, we often prefer the sensational over the real. We want the spheres to be artificial because artificial implies intention. It implies design. It implies a story. A world shaped by time alone feels quiet. But that quiet world is vast. If you could watch the sphere form, you would see a story far older and more powerful than lost civilization. You would see ancient water carrying iron through volcanic ash. You would see minerals bonding and growing. You would see pressure shaping form. And over spans of time that stretch beyond imagination, you would see that nature can do what humans assume only intelligence can achieve. People look at the spheres and wonder if they are proof of something forgotten. They are. They are proof that we forget the creativity of Earth. We forget that perfection does not require purpose. We forget that nature is capable of symmetry. The geologists did not take the mystery away. They revealed a deeper mystery beneath it. The spheres show us that the Earth itself is an artist, not one guided by intention, but one guided by laws. Given enough time, even stone can teach us what perfection looks like. Imagine standing inside a canyon carved over millions of years. At your feet lie fragments of minerals shaped like roses. Their petals are not soft or delicate. They are blades of crystal fanned out in perfect spirals. They look like something a human artist created to imitate the tenderness of a flower, but no artist touched them. They're called desert roses. They form when water evaporates and leaves behind crystals of gypsum or barite. Layer by layer, the crystals push outward in radial symmetry. The result is something that looks intentional, designed, alive, yet no intelligence guided the process. Only the slow withdrawal of moisture shaped them. Travel north to the cliffs of Ireland, and you see another wonder. Giant basalt columns rise from the sea, fitted together like massive puzzle pieces. Each column is a polygon with sides that match its neighbours. They appear carved by ancient builders, yet no builder existed when they formed. Basalt, once molten rock, cooled slowly. As it cooled, it contracted and fractured along lines of equal stress. Those fractures formed straight edges. The edges formed repeating geometric shapes. Nature did not imitate architecture. Architecture imitated nature. Far beneath Utah and Arizona lie banded iron formations. Layers of ironstone ripple in red and silver patterns across the walls of canyons. These layers recorded the breath of Earth itself as primitive bacteria released oxygen into ancient oceans. The rock formed not from machines but from chemistry intertwined with early life. The pattern is so precise, so rhythmic, that it appears designed. Only time and consistency shaped it. Nature has been making geometry long before humans walked upright. When geologists studied the Klerksdorp spheres, this is what they already knew. They had seen minerals create cubes so sharp that their edges could cut skin. They had seen silica grow into hexagonal crystals with flawless alignment. They had seen pyrite form perfect squares and rectangles that resemble the blocks of cathedrals. Minerals do not form chaos, they form order. The sphere is the simplest expression of order. To understand why nature forms spheres, you must imagine a world without intention. Picture a microscopic grain of iron oxide suspended in water inside soft volcanic ash. Water flows from every direction at once. Iron-rich fluid enters the cavity. Molecules attach evenly because no side of the grain receives more pressure than another. The grain becomes a speck. The speck becomes a seed. The seed becomes a shell. Every moment the environment remains stable, the shell expands outward in perfect balance. The sphere does not form because it is the most beautiful shape. It forms because it is the most efficient. A sphere requires the least amount of energy to enclose a volume. Nature always chooses the path that demands the least energy. Humans see perfection and assume intention. Nature sees equilibrium and produces a sphere. Some spheres form layers, others do not. The Klerksdorp spheres formed layers because the mineral-rich water carrying the iron oxide did not remain perfectly constant. Sometimes the water contained more dissolved iron, sometimes less. Each shift produced a shell with a slightly different hardness. When erosion later touched the sphere, the softer shell wore away more quickly, revealing the boundary between layers. Those revealed boundaries became the groove. When the sphere is placed inside a museum display and lit from above, the groove casts a shadow. The shadow makes the groove appear sharper and deeper than it truly is. The human eye interprets the shadow as a sign of carving. Yet carving leaves directional marks. Under magnification, the groove holds no such marks. It is smooth, it is continuous. It is not cut, it is exposed. Other natural spheres form through similar processes. In the deserts of Morocco, iron concretions roll like marbles across the sand. Some are small enough to swallow, others are as large as melons. When people encounter them without context, they believe they must be artificial. Yet every one of them formed from nothing more than mineral deposition and erosion. In areas known as Moeraki along the coast of New Zealand, enormous stone spheres emerge from the sand. Each sphere is larger than a person. Their sides are cracked into polygonal patterns, like the back of a giant tortoise. The people who first discovered them told stories of eggs laid by mythical creatures. Later explorers believed the spheres were the remains of ancient giants. But when geologists examined them, they found that the spheres were concretions. They formed inside mudstone. They emerged as the sea carved the cliffs away. Every time a sphere appears where randomness was expected, the imagination leaps. At a glance, the Klerksdorp spheres seem unique, but once you compare them with these other natural marvels, a pattern forms. Nature is a master of shape. When it grows minerals inward, the result is a crystal. When it grows them outward, the result is a sphere. Symmetry is not rare in nature. What is rare is our willingness to recognize it. Human minds search for intention. When we see a tool, we try to identify the maker. When we see a pattern, we assume meaning. When we see perfection, we imagine purpose. But perfection does not belong only to designers. It belongs to balance, and balance belongs to time. Geologists who study these formations speak of them not as mysteries, but as witnesses. The spheres tell the story of pressure, water, and mineral movement. They speak in the language of chemistry. They are slow diaries of the Earth's past. Yet there is a deeper beauty in the natural explanation. The idea that nature can perform what humans mistake for technology reminds us that human invention is not superior to nature. It is inspired by nature. Humans carve spheres because the Earth carved them first. Humans shape crystals because the Earth perfected symmetry billions of years earlier. The Klerksdorp spheres are not alone. They are part of a vast family of shapes born from time. They teach us that perfection does not require intention. The world can create precision without a blueprint. The world can create symmetry without an architect. Nature does not think. Nature simply is. And in its patience, it creates forms that make us question our assumptions. Nature seeks balance because balance costs nothing. The laws of physics reward simplicity. The Klerksdorp spheres teach us that shapes do not always come from minds. Often they come from mathematics expressed through matter. Imagine a droplet of water floating in complete weightlessness. It will not stretch into an oval. It will not form a cube. It will pull itself inward equally from every direction until it becomes a sphere. A sphere is the natural solution to the problem of energy distribution. It is the shape that matter chooses when it is unbothered by outside forces. Inside ancient volcanic ash, where the spheres began forming, there were no forces of intention, only chemistry. Iron carried by water encountered oxygen and converted into iron oxide. At first, the particles were tiny, invisible. They drifted in solution with no shape at all. As they collided, they bonded. When too many particles gathered in one place, the surrounding water pushed back, evenly and without prejudice. If more material gathered on one side, the pressure on that side increased slightly. The path of least resistance caused the growth to continue in a different direction, always correcting toward even distribution. In this slow negotiation between matter and space, the sphere emerged. Human design often imitates this natural efficiency. We build tanks as spheres because they distribute pressure evenly. We build bearings as spheres because they roll with minimal friction. We imagine that we created these solutions, yet nature discovered them first, long before our ancestors shaped their first stones. When you hold a sphere made by nature, you are holding proof that form does not require consciousness. Shape can arise from laws. Perfection can emerge from patience. Consider snowflakes. Every snowflake begins as a speck of dust surrounded by water vapor. As it falls through changing layers of air, tiny ice crystals arrange themselves according to temperature and humidity. Each snowflake becomes a six-pointed star because that shape is the most stable arrangement for water molecules. People often speak about snowflakes as if they were the product of infinite creativity. But snowflakes do not express creativity. They express constraint. Geometry forms not because water has imagination, but because water has rules. The same principle appears in minerals deep underground. Salt crystals form perfect cubes. Quartz forms six-sided pillars. Pyrite forms squares so crisp and flat they resemble coins. In each case, geometry arises from the most stable configuration of atoms. The atoms are not searching for beauty. They are reaching for balance. The Klerksdorp spheres were born in stillness. They grew slowly as iron oxide accumulated. Each pause in growth became a boundary. Each shift in chemicals created a new layer. Over time, erosion revealed the layers as grooves. People saw those grooves and assumed intention. The truth is far more profound. The grooves are not lines of design. They are the scars of time. If you were to hold one of the spheres and look at the groove, you might imagine a spinning machine pressing a tool against the surface. But erosion does not use tools. It uses time. The soft layer crumbles, the hard layer remains. The line becomes visible, and your mind, trained by a lifetime of human-made objects, decides that the line must be purposeful. When humans encounter perfection in nature, they struggle to accept it. Not because perfection is rare, but because humans expect nature to be wild and humans to be orderly. In truth, nature is orderly and humans are wild. Nature follows the deepest rules of existence. Humans chase stories. The next time you see a seashell with a flawless spiral, remember that it follows a mathematical curve known as the golden ratio. The next time you see honeycomb in a beehive, remember that bees did not invent hexagons. They use hexagons because the shape stores the most material with the least effort. Even animals find geometry when guided by instinct. Nature is a mathematician. Water droplets become spheres, salt becomes cubes, ice becomes stars, iron oxide becomes nodules that rest in ancient stone until miners discover them and mistake them for artifacts. When the geologists completed their analyses of the Klerksdorp spheres, they shared their findings publicly. They did not mock those who had believed the more dramatic story. They simply explained that the spheres formed naturally. They emphasized that time is capable of shaping matter with more precision than any tool. They reminded the world that nature is not sloppy, it is precise. Some people listened, others did not. Those who wanted a mystery did not want a mineral. Those who wanted proof of a forgotten civilization did not want proof of geological patience. Those who sought intention did not want to hear about balance. But there is a deeper lesson hidden in the quiet explanation. The universe is not obligated to create mysteries to impress us. It is already miraculous. It already works with scales of time and forces that our minds can barely grasp. The fact that a small iron sphere can form itself inside ancient rock without any mind guiding it is not disappointing. It is breathtaking. The spheres teach us that the Earth produces patterns without needing permission from imagination. They teach us that the world is not shaped only by intelligence, but by laws that existed long before intelligence arose. They teach us that what we call perfection is simply equilibrium expressed through matter. Nature does not need intention to create beauty. The Klerksdorp spheres are reminders that perfection exists in the quiet places that humans overlook. In stone, in water, in minerals, in time. In the end, the spheres are not evidence that humans are the descendants of an ancient civilization lost to deep history. They are evidence that humans are the descendants of a planet that creates more order, more balance, and more beauty than we ever realized. The real story is not that someone made the spheres. The real story is that no one had to. In a dusty storage room of a small museum in Texas sits a hammer. It rests in a glass case, surrounded not by cheering crowds or flashing cameras, but by the quiet hum of air conditioning and the faint smell of paper archives. The hammer does not look unusual. Its handle is short, its head is made of iron, and its surface is worn from age. If you passed it in a hardware store, you would never pause to look twice. Yet according to countless viral articles and sensational books, this hammer should not exist. It has been called the London Hammer, named not after the city in England, but after the tiny town of London in Texas, where it was discovered. Many claim it is evidence of a civilization from a time before humans existed. The most dramatic stories insist the hammer is 100 million years old, and therefore proof that we are not the first intelligent species to walk the earth. It began in the summer of 1934, when a couple walking along a creek bed found a strange chunk of rock. Embedded inside it, protruding just enough to catch their attention, was an iron object. The couple cracked the concretion open and revealed a small hammer. Its head was smooth iron, wrapped in a stone matrix that looked ancient. The hammer seemed to defy geology. If the rock was millions of years old, then the tool inside must be just as old. Newspapers and fringe authors seized the discovery. They did not examine the details. They did not ask questions. They simply declared that the hammer rewrote the history of civilization. For those who wanted to believe that humans once possessed forgotten technology, this hammer became a sacred object. No one cared that the handle appeared to be made of recent wood. No one cared that the iron looked more like 19th century metal than prehistoric alloy. They wanted it to be ancient. They needed it to be ancient. The hammer did not become famous because of what it was. It became famous because of what people hoped it meant. When the hammer eventually made its way into a museum collection, scientists offered to test it. They wanted to determine the composition of the metal and the age of the wood. The museum initially refused, concerned that testing would damage the hammer. To some, this meant the museum was hiding something, but eventually, researchers convinced the museum to allow non-destructive analysis. They used imaging techniques and chemical evaluation to determine the structure of the iron. The results were clear. The metal in the hammer contained iron with a purity consistent with iron made in the late 1800s. Not ancient, not mysterious, human. But what about the stone that held it? The answer lies not in millions of years, but in the nature of concretion. When an object made of metal or wood lies in soil saturated with dissolved minerals, the minerals begin to gather around it. If the soil contains limestone or other sedimentary minerals, they can cement into a solid mass around the object in only a few decades. This process forms a concreted shell. When someone sees a metal object inside hardened stone, their mind jumps to an assumption the object must be as old as the stone. But that assumption ignores the speed of mineral cementation. The earth can turn mud into stone far faster than we imagine. Within a human lifetime, a lost tool can become preserved inside rock that looks ancient. The London hammer is not an artifact from a forgotten age. It is a tool that fell into wet sediment, became encased in a concretion, and was later discovered. The stone is not ancient. The process is not a mystery. But the story persists because mystery is more enticing than geology. Another artifact often held up as impossible is the Coso artifact, discovered in California in 1961. 3 amateur rock collectors were searching for geodes when they found a rock with a strange shape. It was not smooth. It looked like an irregular concretion. They cut the stone open expecting a hollow crystal interior. Instead, they found a metal cylinder. The cylinder was wrapped in layers of hardened clay and sediment. Inside the cylinder was an object that resembled a spark plug. This discovery sparked a frenzy. Newspapers declared that a spark plug had been found inside rock that was 500,000 years old. The claim spread quickly. Books labeled it proof of ancient technology. Some insisted it was evidence that extraterrestrial visitors had once left machinery on Earth. The Coso artifact became a legend, but once again, no one asked for analysis. No one wondered if the age of the sediment was being confused with the age of the object. Eventually, a group of skeptical researchers examined the object and made a simple observation. They identified the spark plug model. It matched a spark plug manufactured in the 1920s. The metal prong, the ceramic insulator, and even the thread pattern were identical. In other words, the Coso artifact was not ancient. It was a spark plug from a long-forgotten piece of machinery that became encased in iron-rich sediment. Mineral-rich water flowed around it, and layer by layer the sediment hardened. The concretion formed far faster than people assumed. Those who believed the artifact proved lost civilizations did not want to believe that history could be so ordinary. The London hammer and the Coso artifact both reveal the same pattern. When people encounter something they do not immediately understand, they leap toward the extraordinary rather than pause for the simple. A mistake becomes a theory. A theory becomes a story. A story becomes a movement. The object itself becomes irrelevant. What matters is the feeling it generates. But nothing illustrates this tendency better than the claims of ancient batteries in Iraq. In 1936, workers unearthed clay jars with copper tubes inside them near Baghdad. Some researchers suggested that if the jars were filled with an acidic liquid, they could produce a small electrical current. Almost overnight, these jars were called Baghdad batteries. A few museum displays even demonstrated how the voltage could be achieved. Fringe writers went further. They declared that ancient people used electricity to power tools, machines, or lights. They asked how such technology could exist without leaving behind electrical infrastructure. But when archaeologists returned to the original excavation notes, they found something that the sensational stories ignored. The copper tubes contained asphalt seals and iron rods. These tubes were not arranged to store charge. They were arranged to preserve objects. The jars were part of a ritual practice used to protect religious scrolls or sacred texts. The copper prevented decay. The asphalt prevented moisture. The arrangement was not electrical, it was practical. If these jars had no copper, no rod, and no asphalt, no one would think they were batteries. The interpretation was created by modern viewers searching for a modern explanation. The objects were not impossible, they were misunderstood. These examples share one common thread. Humans are not comfortable with uncertainty. When confronted with something unfamiliar, we rush to fill the silence with assumption. We prefer a thrilling wrong answer to a slow and careful search for a correct one. The unknown becomes a magnet for invention. People who want mystery will find it, even if they have to create it. The truth, however, is far more interesting than the fantasy. Not because it validates ancient technology, but because it reveals how humans react to the unknown. A hammer becomes proof of lost civilizations. A spark plug becomes evidence of extraterrestrial machinery. A storage jar becomes a power source. The object does not change. Our stories do. Humans are pattern seekers. We see faces in clouds. We see animals in stars. When we look at an object that seems out of place, we supply the missing context ourselves. We assume intentionality where there is only accident. We assume design where there is only natural process. We assume meaning where there is only time. Out-of-place artifacts do not tell us that history is wrong. They tell us that humans crave wonder. They tell us that we prefer a dramatic narrative to a patient explanation. And they tell us that truth often loses to myth because myth is easier to share. Yet, as we examine these artifacts more closely, we discover something profound. Not about ancient technology, but about ourselves. We learn that we are driven by curiosity. We learn that we want to believe that our world contains hidden chapters. And we learn that when we are faced with what we cannot immediately explain, our imagination fills the space where knowledge has not yet arrived. But the strongest lesson is this: the existence of wonder does not require the rejection of evidence. Curiosity is not diminished by truth. When we allow the scientific method to guide our understanding, the natural world becomes far more astonishing than any invented story. The London hammer is not proof of lost technology, but it is proof that minerals can turn ordinary objects into time capsules. The Koso artifact is not evidence of forgotten machinery, but it is evidence of how quickly nature can disguise the recent past as the distant past. These artifacts do not reveal that we are the second or third civilization to rise on Earth. They reveal that we are the first species to look at a stone, a sphere, a spark plug, a hammer, and say, "This changes everything." Curiosity does not make us foolish. Curiosity makes us human. And the more we learn, the deeper our wonder grows. In the quiet dawn of human history, long before cities rose from riverbanks and long before writing carved thought into clay, someone picked up a stone that gleamed differently from the rest. It was not completely stone. It was not completely metal. It was native copper, a rare gift of nature that could be lifted from the earth already shaped by pressure and time. No smelting, no fire, no hammer, just pure metal resting on the surface, waiting to be noticed. In that moment, the story of human technology began. Human hands discovered metals slowly. They did not leap from stone tools to advanced machines. The transformation took thousands of generations. The first metal objects were not weapons. They were beads, pendants, and small ceremonial items. People wore copper before they learned how to work it. They valued the metal because it caught the sunlight and held color in a world of brown wood, grey stone and bone. They did not understand its potential. They were drawn to it simply because it was beautiful. 9,000 years before the present, people in the region that would one day become modern Turkey began shaping copper by striking it against stone. Copper is soft. It bends under force. It can be flattened without breaking. As people learned this through experimentation, metal changed from decoration into tool. A spark of possibility lit a fire that would burn through the entire timeline of civilization. Fire transformed everything. When humans first placed copper in a clay vessel and surrounded it with charcoal, they discovered that copper could melt. They did not know the concept of melting points. They did not measure temperature in degrees Celsius or degree Fahrenheit. They simply watched the glow of fire and the change of matter. As molten copper cooled, it held its shape. Unlike stone, which shattered, metal could be repaired. Unlike wood, which burned, metal endured. A new material meant a new way of thinking. The leap from copper to bronze was not an accident. It was the result of persistence. Someone added a small amount of tin into molten copper, and something remarkable happened. The mixture hardened into bronze. Bronze could hold an edge. It cut. It held sharpness. Tools became stronger. Weapons changed the balance of power. Bronze reshaped warfare, agriculture, and architecture. This was not a sudden revolution. It was a slow widening of possibility. Civilizations rose with the mastery of metal. The Sumerians shaped bronze into chisels and axes. The Egyptians cast bronze to carve stone that would become temples. In China, bronze casting became so advanced that artwork on ceremonial vessels required planning in multiple layers of clay molds. Every new refinement in metalworking changed the shape of society. Kings and chiefs measured their power not only in land but in access to metal. Yet even bronze had limits. It required tin, and tin was rare. Trade routes stretched across continents to find it. When tin became scarce, bronze production slowed. It was a crisis that lasted centuries, but scarcity created opportunity. Some metals are harder to find, but easier to transform once discovered. Iron. The earliest iron used by humans fell from the sky. Meteoric iron is already alloyed with nickel. Ancient Egyptians shaped beads from it. They called these beads gifts from the heavens. They did not know that the iron they wore was older than Earth itself. They only knew that it was unlike stone and stronger than copper. For thousands of years, humans worked meteor iron without understanding that iron existed in the ground below them. It took time to learn that iron ore required intense heat. Copper melts at about 1090 degrees Celsius. Iron demands nearly 1500 degrees Celsius. Early furnaces could not reach that temperature. Instead of melting, iron ore softened into a spongy mass full of impurities. Blacksmiths removed slag by repeated heating and hammering. They did not know chemistry. They learned through rhythm: heat, strike, fold, cool, heat again. The hammer became the first scientific instrument. When the first iron blade held a sharp edge longer than bronze, everything changed. Iron weapons and iron plows fueled expansion. Iron tools dug deeper irrigation channels. Iron axes cleared forests faster. Iron chisels carved stone with precision. Cities grew because metal gave them strength. At this point in time, humans knew how to dig ores from the ground, build furnaces hot enough to transform them, and shape metal into precise forms. These skills required mathematics and science long before those subjects had names. Craft became knowledge. Knowledge became mastery. In every case, the story followed the same pattern. Humans found a material. They experimented. They observed. They improved. Nothing appeared suddenly. No lost civilization handed down blueprints. No mysterious artifacts predated humans. Every step can be traced. Every improvement has evidence. Every tool is part of a chain of slow, cumulative innovation. Contrast this with the claims about impossible artifacts. The London hammer was a recent tool trapped inside concretion. The Kozo artifact was a spark plug from the 1920s. The Klerksdorp spheres were mineral nodules shaped by time. These objects did not demonstrate ancient technology. They demonstrated misunderstanding. People saw technology where there was chemistry. They saw intention where there was equilibrium. Real ancient metalworking leaves traces. There are slag piles where metal cooled, furnaces with melted interiors, tools in every stage of development, broken castings, failed experiments, workshops littered with evidence. Historians can trace the evolution of metal from the first hand-shaped copper beads to the iron blades carried by warriors who built empires. Nothing appears out of nowhere. There is no sudden burst of perfect machining in ancient time, no precision sphere in Precambrian stone, no spark plug in prehistoric sediment. Real technology does not appear inexplicably advanced. It grows the same way a tree grows from a seed, slowly, in stages, through trial and error. When you look at a bronze axe or an iron spearhead, you are not seeing invention. You are seeing persistence. Someone learned how to make the furnace hotter. Someone learned to direct airflow into the flame. Someone discovered that hammering drives out impurities. These innovations did not come from a single mind. They were discovered through countless lives spent listening to the language of fire. Metalworking marks the moment when humans stopped accepting the world as they found it and began reshaping it. It marks the birth of engineering, of science, of intention. If ancient advanced civilizations had existed, they would have left behind slag heaps, mines, furnaces, smelting sites, tools in various stages of refinement. We find none of these in rocks older than early human settlements. We find no metal artifacts in Precambrian layers because metalworking did not exist then. Life itself barely existed then. When the ancient spheres of Klerksdorp were forming deep inside stone, humanity was not yet a dream in the future of evolution. No thought shaped those spheres. No hands touched them. They formed because matter follows laws. They formed because water carries iron. They formed because stability builds symmetry. Human metalworking is not evidence that we inherited technology from a forgotten civilization. Human metalworking is evidence that we learn. The first copper bead, the first bronze blade, the first forged iron, each represents a moment where curiosity met patience, where experimentation met observation, where failure led to understanding. There is nothing mysterious about how humans became the first true metalworkers. We simply refuse to stop trying. When you look at a perfect sphere in a museum case and wonder whether ancient hands could have shaped it, remember this. Anything shaped by humans leaves scars of effort, imperfect lines, tool marks, evidence of trial, but something shaped by nature leaves no intention at all. Only balance, only time. The difference between artifact and concretion is not the shape, it is the story. The air inside the mine feels heavy, dense with ancient dust and the weight of time itself. The walls shimmer with pale grey stone that once was volcanic ash. Long before rivers carved the landscape, long before plants rooted themselves in soil, long before animals walked the surface of earth, ash settled in ancient seas and began a transformation so slow that no human mind can truly grasp it. The rock that now surrounds the tunnel began forming during the very early history of the planet, nearly 3 billion years before the present. Back then, the sun was dimmer, the atmosphere was toxic to anything we would call life, and the oceans held metals that today exist only in scattered traces. Nothing about that world resembled the one we know, yet deep in that ancient stone, something was happening. Something without sound or intention, guided only by chemistry and the gentle flow of mineral-rich water. A small kernel of iron oxide formed inside the soft volcanic ash, no larger than a grain of sand. Water seeped through the sediment, carrying dissolved iron in slow currents that had no purpose, no direction, no awareness. When the iron encountered oxygen within the ash, it bonded and solidified. That microscopic seed became the heart of a nodule. Time added layer upon layer, not centuries, not thousands of years, but spans so enormous that the mind can only imagine them as deep time. There were no witnesses, but the evidence remained sealed within the layers of the spheres. Rock does not behave like a static solid at these scales. Even stone flows when given millions of years. Volcanic ash slowly compresses. Water travels through pores and fractures. Iron oxide settles into tiny cavities. The sphere grows outward with perfect balance because pressure acts from all directions equally. Nature does not force a shape. It allows the most efficient shape to emerge. If iron were to grow unevenly, the surrounding pressure would redirect its expansion. The sphere is not created by intention. The sphere is created by equilibrium. Inside the ancient ash, the nodule continues to grow. A layer forms, then the chemistry changes slightly. Perhaps the mineral content in the water shifts. Perhaps the temperature settles differently. A new layer forms that is harder or softer than the last. Millions of years pass. The cycles repeat. Each pulse of chemistry creates a new ring. Just as trees form growth rings in wood, these nodules record the rhythm of Earth's early geologic heartbeat. Eventually, heat and pressure transform the ash into pyrophyllite, a metamorphic rock that is soft enough for miners to cut yet strong enough to preserve what formed inside it. The spheres remain quietly waiting, hidden from every storm, every extinction event, every rise and fall of continents. They wait as Earth invents oceans filled with life. They wait as single-celled organisms evolve into complex beings. They wait through ice ages and volcanic winters. They wait through eras when dinosaurs ruled, and eras when they turned to dust. When the first humans walked upright, the spheres had already existed longer than all recorded history combined. Inside the pyrophyllite, water continues to migrate. Over time, the stone becomes softer around the nodule. The sphere is not bonded tightly within the rock. It rests in a small pocket, held loosely. When miners cut into the rock, the sphere rolls out. It seems intentional. It seems placed. But the looseness is a sign of how minerals interact over enormous time spans. The soft rock gives way. The iron remains. Eventually, a miner picks up the sphere and turns it in their hands. It feels cool and smooth. A groove runs around it in a perfect line. Instantly, a story forms. In the mind, a tool mark, a seam, a piece of machinery, something shaped, not grown. The mind reaches for intention because the human brain is wired to see purpose everywhere, but the groove is not a mark of design. It is the exposure of one of the internal layers where the mineral composition shifts. When erosion removes the softer material, the harder layer remains. The groove is not a cut, it is a boundary, a geological memory revealed by time. To understand this, imagine building a sphere by dipping a seed into different mixtures of paint. If each mixture dries with slightly different hardness, then when the outside is chipped away, the harder rings remain. The groove is simply the outline of that difference. Nature paints with minerals instead of pigment, and erosion performs the revealing. Scientists received samples of the spheres and sliced them carefully. Under magnification, the interior revealed rings. The rings matched the groove. Each band showed a slight shift in mineral density. Each band followed the perfect curvature of the sphere. No tool guided the formation, only chemistry and time. Some spheres are not smooth, others are not perfectly round. Just as some crystals are sharp and others fractured, variation is normal. Perfection in nature does not require intention, but it does require consistency. When conditions remain stable, spheres emerge. When conditions fluctuate more dramatically, the sphere becomes less perfect. Every specimen tells a slightly different story of its formation. The question then becomes how long it takes to form such nodules. Humans measure time in days and years. Earth measures time in pressure and change. For every layer in a nodule to form, minerals must migrate, precipitate, and crystallize. These processes do not happen quickly. They take spans of time longer than the entire existence of human metalworking. The nodules were finished long before the first humans shaped copper into beads or mixed tin and copper into bronze. The spheres are artifacts of deep time, not of intelligence. Someone once asked a geologist why the spheres look so perfect if they are natural. The geologist responded that perfection is not unique to design. Perfection is the natural outcome of any system seeking balance. A water droplet in weightlessness becomes a sphere. A bubble of molten rock becomes a sphere. A growing iron nodule becomes a sphere. Perfection does not require a maker. It requires stability. When miners and museum visitors examine the spheres, they often ask what purpose they served. They imagine lost civilizations placing them inside stone as messages or tools. But nature does not work in purpose. Nature works in process. The spheres were not shaped to serve a function. They formed because Earth was busy rearranging minerals while life itself was learning how to exist. The real miracle is not that they are perfect. The real miracle is that they survived 3 billion years intact. Think about what that means. Every human structure will crumble long before that span of time passes. Even mountains erode into dust. Continents break apart and collide again. But these spheres remain because they formed in a stable pocket, protected from change, until curious hands finally uncovered them. The spheres are reminders that the world does not need intention to create wonder. We are the ones who bring intention. We are the ones searching for meaning. They do not answer questions, they ask them. When you hold a sphere, you hold time. Not human time, but planetary time. Geological time. Time that creates continents. Time that erases oceans. Time that grows mountains and destroys them again. The sphere is not a mystery because humans cannot explain it. It is a mystery because humans cannot truly comprehend that much time. The truth is not less magical than the myth. The truth is far more powerful. Nature does not need tools to create perfection. Nature needs only patience. A person stands in front of a glass display case. Inside, it rests an object they cannot explain. It is smooth. It is old. It does not look like something nature should be able to create. In that moment, their imagination fills the space that knowledge has not yet reached. The mind whispers possibilities. What if someone made this before history began? What if there were civilizations that rose and vanished long before our own? What if the timeline we learned in school is only a fraction of the truth? The object becomes a portal for wonder, but wonder can lead in two directions. One path seeks understanding, the other seeks validation of a belief. The human brain evolved to recognize patterns. In the ancient world, seeing patterns meant survival. Seeing a shape in the grass could save a life if the shape turned out to be a predator. Our ancestors survived by assuming intention everywhere. They connected dots even when no dots existed. Today the world has changed, but the wiring of our minds has not. When we stare at an unfamiliar artifact, our instinct is to search for meaning, not randomness. We do not ask how nature could have shaped it. We ask who shaped it. The leap from observation to assumption is immediate. Psychologists call this tendency-agency detection. We assume that events are caused by decision and intention rather than by blind processes. When lightning strikes, ancient people invented gods. When eclipses block the sun, they invented myths. When we find a perfect sphere in ancient rock, we invent civilizations. Mystery feels purposeful. Purpose feels comforting, but purpose comes from us, not from the object. Place two people in front of the same sphere. One sees evidence of nature, the other sees evidence of lost technology. What changed? Not the sphere, the interpretation. One mind values explanation, the other values mystery. Both are responding to a deeper need. We want our world to feel larger than what we already know. We want to believe that history did not begin with us. We want to believe that there is something hidden, waiting to be uncovered. In the 1970s, a magazine printed an article about the spheres found in South Africa. The writer did not understand geology. They did not speak to researchers. They simply described the spheres as unexplainable and suggested that a government laboratory could not cut them because they were too perfect. Readers did not question the claim. They embraced it. The magazine fed curiosity with implication, not evidence, and implication spread faster than truth. When the internet arrived, the myth evolved. Images of the spheres appeared on forums. Users repeated the same unverified lines, perfectly spherical, too exact for modern machines. Found in 3 billion-year-old rock. People shared the claims because they wanted them to be true. When you want to believe something, you search for confirmation, not correction. The psychology behind these viral mysteries follows a recognizably human sequence. First comes surprise, then comes wonder, then comes attachment. Once a person becomes emotionally attached to a mysterious explanation, evidence becomes a threat. They defend the myth with more energy than scientists defend the facts. The myth becomes personal. In this way, out-of-place artifacts become mirrors. They reveal more about the viewer than about the artifact. When someone says the spheres prove that advanced civilizations existed before humans, what they are really expressing is a belief about themselves. They want humans to be part of a grand hidden narrative. They want history to be epic. If the universe has secrets, then their life gains meaning through discovery. The object becomes a symbol of possibility. But curiosity and belief are not the same. Curiosity asks questions. Belief provides answers even when no evidence exists. Curiosity welcomes challenge. Belief resists it. Curiosity grows. Belief freezes. There's another layer to this psychology. Humans fear insignificance. When we learn that Earth shaped the spheres billions of years before humans arrived, we are reminded that we are young. We are reminded that our entire history is barely a moment in the age of the planet. To some, that idea feels uncomfortable. They prefer a story in which humans are part of an ancient legacy, not a recent arrival. Because if the spheres were made by an advanced civilization, then humanity is not alone. We are inheritors. We are connected to something older. If the spheres were shaped by geology, then we are simply witnesses. The mind naturally chooses the story that makes us feel significant. Researchers studying belief systems have found that humans interpret new information emotionally first, logically second. When information threatens a strongly held belief, the brain responds with the same defensive pattern used for physical danger. Logic does not fail because humans are incapable. Logic fails because humans are emotional. It is easier to believe in a lost civilization than to accept that nature can create perfection. It is easier to believe in ancient technology than to imagine billions of years of time shaping matter silently. It is easier to believe in mystery than to accept patience. Curiosity becomes myth when patience is replaced by assumption, and myths thrive on vagueness. The fewer details, the more room for imagination. Nature is not vague. Nature is precise. Nature writes its explanations in stone, but stone requires patience to read. Time leaves evidence. Time leaves patterns. Time leaves layers inside spheres that reveal exactly how they formed. When scientists slice a sphere and show concentric layers that match the groove exactly, the story changes. The mystery becomes geology. But for some, that explanation feels like a loss. They believe that science is taking the wonder away. In truth, science is adding depth. The sphere does not lose meaning when we understand it. It gains meaning. Because now we know what forces shaped it. Now we know how long it waited. Now we know what world existed before we did. The spheres remind us that we are temporary guests on a planet far older than imagination. Our stories are short. Earth's story is long. The mistake is believing that revelation destroys awe. Awe should come from truth, not from invention. There is beauty in realizing that nature shaped something so perfect without the guidance of thought. There is meaning in knowing that time can sculpt matter into symmetry. There is power in admitting that Earth is greater than us. The human mind searches for intention even when it is not there. But the greatest intention is curiosity itself. Curiosity pushes us to ask questions. Curiosity pushes us to explore. The spheres do not reveal lost civilizations. They reveal how our minds chase meaning. What we choose to do with that curiosity is what defines us. The sphere rests in the palm of a hand. It is cool, smooth and silent, a simple object, ordinary at first glance, extraordinary only if someone decides it must be. It took billions of years for nature to shape it, yet the human mind needs only a heartbeat to fill it with meaning. This is the tension at the center of every mystery. The world is full of quiet truths, but human imagination speaks loudly. For decades, people have pointed at objects like this and asked if they are proof of lost civilizations. They imagine metalworkers hidden in a past that predates humanity. They imagine machines turning in the dark beneath the ancient sun. They imagine knowledge erased by time. They imagine that the world we know is only a fragment of a forgotten story. But the more closely we look, the clearer the truth becomes. The sphere tells a story not of intention but of process, not of invention but of patience, not of ancient hands shaping perfect curves, but of minerals, water, pressure, and time working together in silence. It began when volcanic ash settled into a shallow sea, long before fish evolved to swim. Dissolved iron traveled through the soft sediment. Where oxygen met iron, matter hardened. A nodule formed, then another layer, and another. Millions of years passed. The iron continued to accumulate. The planet shifted. Mountains rose and crumbled. Oceans appeared and vanished. Continents drifted like slow-moving puzzle pieces. Inside the stone, the sphere remained, trapped in darkness. The sphere existed before the first forests, before the first insects, before the first dinosaurs, before the first mammal took shape in the shadows. It waited as the world changed again and again. Then one day, a miner with no knowledge of deep time chipped away at the stone, and the sphere rolled free. The miner saw an object. Human imagination saw a message. We want the universe to speak to us. We want the planet to acknowledge our presence. We want to be part of something vast. When we see something we do not understand, our minds create intention. The unknown becomes a canvas for belief. But what makes this sphere remarkable is not the possibility that humans made it. What makes it remarkable is that the Earth made it without us. A planet without language shaped perfection. A planet without thought shaped symmetry. A planet without intention created something that inspired intention in us. Understanding that does not remove the mystery, it deepens it. Inside every sphere, scientists found layers like the rings of a tree. Each ring marked a shift in chemistry, a new era in the rock around it. Nature recorded its own memory without knowing memory exists. The grooves on the outside match the layers within, revealing that the shape is not a product of machining, it is a record written in mineral time. There is humility in accepting that explanation. There is awe in knowing that geology can create forms that rival the work of machines. There is wonder in realizing that perfection does not require a designer. We do not need lost civilizations to make the world magical. The truth is far more powerful. We live on a planet capable of sculpting beauty without our help. The London hammer was not ancient. The Koso artifact was a spark plug. The Baghdad jars preserved scrolls, not electricity. Every time we peel away mystery, we reveal something deeper about ourselves. We learn that we are quick to see intention. We learn that we are eager to fill silence with story. We learn that our minds create meaning before evidence arrives. But curiosity is not a weakness. Curiosity is the engine of progress. It is the force that pushed humans to melt copper, to mix copper and tin into bronze, to heat iron until it surrendered its shape. Curiosity built furnaces. Curiosity built science. Curiosity built knowledge. And curiosity built the myth of the spheres. These spheres are not messages from forgotten ancestors. They are messages from deep time. They remind us that Earth was here long before we were. They remind us that the planet does not need us to create beauty. They remind us that we are new. When we accept the truth, the sphere becomes more meaningful, not less. Instead of an artifact shaped by unknown hands, it becomes a monument to patience, a testament to time, a story of chemistry sculpting matter slowly and inevitably. It becomes a reminder that we are not the protagonists of Earth, we are observers. The greatest mystery was never the sphere, The greatest mystery is why we needed it to be something more than what it is. We search for hidden civilizations not because there is evidence for them, but because we do not want to feel alone in time. We want to believe that someone walked this world before us, someone who knew its secrets. But the sphere shows us a different truth. We are not inheritors, we are explorers. Every question we ask expands our understanding. Every mystery we examine pushes knowledge further. Every time we replace belief with evidence, the world becomes larger, not smaller. A single, iron nodule, shaped by patience rather than intention, reminds us that the universe does not require us to be special. It only invites us to be curious. We did not discover proof of lost technology. We discovered proof that Earth can shape matter more perfectly than we imagined, and that is enough.